So welcome. Sorry for the first couple of minutes. It's always awkward at first, isn't it, when everyone's rolling in and we're just figuring everything out. Welcome to our affirming about I was going to say ADHD, affirming OCD chats. I think a lot of us would be ADHDers because they like to
we flock together.
Absolutely. We're just going to start with quick introductions about ourselves. So my name is Brianna. This is Chloe. We're both clinical psychologists. Sorry, you're almost a clinical psychologist.
Yes, I'm doing my clinical master's next year.
Yay! Yes. I'm a clinical psychologist here at the Psych Hive. And the Psych Hive is a practice that has been running for 2 years now. And its whole MO is about neuroaffirming care. So we really try to be as neuroaffirming in everything that we do as possible. So, of course, this conversation has come up. Our hope is that tonight we just get you thinking about how to be neuroaffirming in the realm of the OCD world. So, Chloe, is there anything else you want to say about yourself?
I think just a disclaimer that I'm actually recovering from the flu at the moment. So I have no idea what form my voice is going to take over this evening. So it's just going to be a fun surprise for us all. And I apologize in advance.
Keeping us on our toes. I love it.
Yes.
A couple of housekeeping things. We are recording, but you are not visible. Keep your microphones off. So there's a few people who need to mute. So if you could just quickly check that you are muted, that would be amazing. Put questions in the chat box at the end. So we will be taking questions at the end, and the best way to do that is via the chat box. Oh, and someone nice says, can you hear it in your voice?
Yeah. Yes. Very sultry tonight, this voice.
Perfect.
Oh, this is me. Okay. So our agenda for this evening. So we are going to start with a bit of a knowledge check-in. This is a self-check-in to see, what you know about OCD now and how confident you feel with understanding it. Then we're going to be looking at why we're even having this conversation. Why are we looking at neuroaffirming care for OCD? And what does that actually look like in practice? We'll then be looking at what OCD is. We'll be looking at different treatment options for OCD, including some takeaways as well. Then some co-occurring, so things that often occur alongside OCD and how to help distinguish them from each other. We will then have some time at the end for some questions. So if any questions pop up, please, note them down so you don't forget, and then we can talk about them afterwards. One important thing is throughout this whole discussion tonight is that we'll be always coming back to neuroaffirming care. So that's the main thread, which is why we have this very cute icon here.
I took it a bit literally, didn't I?
Yes, but I like it. That's fine. It made me remember that that's what I had to say.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, so we'll always be coming back to neuroaffirming care for OCD.
Beautiful. Thanks, Chloe. All right.
Okay. So this is our knowledge check-in. So you can either sort of take a mental note or you can write it down somewhere. So on a scale from 1 to not confident to 5 very confident, how confident do you feel now explaining the difference between obsessions and compulsions? How confident do you feel in supporting an OCD? And how confident are you in distinguishing OCD from autism, anxiety, and other neurodivergences?
We'll just give you a minute to either mentally note that or write it down somewhere.
Yes.
All right. So what is neurodivergence? We're just going to start very broadly and then zone in. So Kassian Asamasu coined the term neurodivergent to describe individuals whose brain function in ways that diverge from the dominant societal standard of neurotypical. This umbrella term can include a wide range of experiences, and Sunny Jane Wise has come along and very helpfully they've done a lot of public advocacy around this, and they've made these infographics, which are just wonderful. So this one on the left you'll see a lot of things under that umbrella. And so it's this idea that neurodivergence is anything that diverges from the neuronorm. So anything that is different to kind of the average, standard, typical, where a brain has gone, I'm going to do this instead. I'm going to be wired differently, think differently, process differently, experience time differently, all those sorts of things. And those things on the right, you can access the neurodiversity smorgasbord online through Sunny Jane's work. And it's just a way of looking at lots of different bits of neurodivergence, different ways of understanding the things that we experience. So we just wanted to start very broadly. So yes, OCD is a type of neurodivergence. Why are we doing this? So we at the Psych Hive, like I said, neuroaffirming care is like our bread and butter. It's everything that we do. It's very, very important to us in the way that we practice. You'd agree with that?
Yeah, I would, yeah.
Yeah. And we come up against quite a lot of harm being done around OCD. So the way that people talk about OCD, the way that people might force exposure for parts, things that are neurodivergent characteristics, and that sort of thing. So we thought this conversation really has to catch up to where autism and ADHD is. So that's why we're here. So we're going to have a good chat tonight. So just reminding everyone to mute themselves. And the next point I want to make is just how to spot that neuroaffirming care when it comes to OCD. A lot of us are very used to doing it with autism and ADHD now. We know a lot about the language, the identity first language, saying, oh, I'm an autistic person rather than I have autism, or other terms like not using ASD and that sort of thing. But how does it apply to OCD? This might be the first time you've ever thought about this. And so a neuroaffirming view sees OCD as a valid neurotype and as a type of neurodivergence. It uses neuroaffirming language. So you'll notice that we're saying things like OCDer. So they are an OCDer. And that's just a way of sort of us trying out identity first language for OCD and seeing how it feels. And so we welcome you to do the same. Also not on the neuroaffirming language point, like not being really deficits based, not being like it's that you can't do this. It's just that difference is different. It's not a problem. OCD can be very disabling, which is that last point there. But we don't like the word disorder, do we?
No, it's icky.
It's so icky. So I don't like the word disorder, but acknowledging that it really is very disabling. Sometimes it really, really can be, especially that moderate to severe kind of range. We like to use a collaborative approach. We like to respect lived experience. We like to, when we consider other needs. A neuroaffirming approach explores underlying fear and function, not just symptom reduction. And it considers when it is disabling or a disorder. And then the non-neuroaffirming side, the red flags, is when treatment is really directive rather than collaborative. When it's saying, this is what we're going to do. You don't really have a choice. You can choose to be here, but this is what we're going to do if you're here. So that's very directive. When it's using deficits-based language, when it forces exposure, or especially exposure towards aspects of neurodivergence, when it focuses on fixing the individual, this conversation of intervention versus acceptance, we like to say that, and we're going to talk heaps more about this idea of treatment. Can you treat OCD? That's in your next slide, Chloe. Thinking about making acceptance for your neurotype. That doesn't mean accepting every bit of distress. You know, you can work through trying to reduce the distress, but accepting it as your neurotype is really important. So when that's not done, that's a bit of a red flag.
Okay, so misunderstandings about OCD. There is actually a lot of them. We could have done a whole page, but these are the most common ones. At the top is my most, my biggest pet peeve with misunderstandings with OCD is how people say everyone is a little bit OCD. That is just not true. You either have OCD or you don't. But just because somebody presents with characteristics that might, be similar to OCD or be part of OCD does not mean that they are OCD. As a hyperbolic example, if, somebody has symptoms of pregnancy, like they have morning sickness, you won't say, well, everybody's a little bit pregnant, right? It's just a symptom, it's a characteristic, but the reasoning behind it there could be so many different reasons. So the same as with OCD. The other one is OCD is about being clean and tidy. That is also not true. There is, of course, aspects of OCD where part of it is, the need to have clean surfaces to feel clean. But it is bigger than that. I find that it's quite reductive to say it's just about being clean and tidy. And often when people talk about it, they talk about it in a positive way, in the sense of somebody having a clean and tidy house. They don't actually acknowledge the amount of distress that actually comes with having, an obsession with cleanliness. The next one is pure O. So for anyone that doesn't know what pure O means, it means purely obsessional OCD. So you can actually just have obsessions, and that's part of the criteria, which we'll get to. But pure O was actually coined by a clinical psychologist, Dr. Philipson, in 1988, and he coined it to describe those who experienced non-observable compulsions. So the compulsions were still there, but they were often mental compulsions. And it's meant to sort of identify that OCD doesn't always present the same for everybody. So there's a bit of a misconception with what pure O actually means, but it is important to actually recognize what those compulsions are, and if they're mental or if they're, observable, if they're physical. OCD isn't treatable. It is actually treatable, but treatment focuses more on well-being, that person being able to live a healthy, positive life. It doesn't always mean that the obsessions and compulsions won't be there at all. It just means that trying to get them to a point where that person can, still live their life fully. Focusing on the compulsions will treat the OCD. That is kind of just like playing whack-a-mole. If you're just focusing on the compulsions, you're essentially just hitting the compulsions each time they come up, but you're not actually getting to the root cause. And your arm is going to get very sore. So
great analogy.
Yes, thank you.
Alrighty. So what is OCD?
What is OCD? Okay. So the DSM criteria for OCD, criteria A is obsessions or compulsions, or both. So obsessions are recurrent and persistent thoughts, urges, or images that are unwanted and cause anxiety or distress. And compulsions are repetitive behaviors or mental acts that the individual feels driven to perform in response to an obsession or according to rigid rules, and are aimed at preventing or reducing distress or a feared outcome, and is clearly excessive. Criterion B is that the obsessions and compulsions are either time-consuming or cause a lot of distress to the individual. So time-consuming, according to the DSM-5, is more than 1 hour a day, but it does depend, of course, on that person's routine and the impact to their life, what they would actually consider time-consuming. And the distress and the impact on functioning, again, can very much depend on that individual. So sometimes for a lot of OCDers, they will still do all the things they're meant to do. They'll go to work, they'll come home, they'll study, they'll do all those things.
They hold relationships.
Absolutely. Yeah. So technically, they're quote unquote very functioning, but the internal distress and the amount of energy that it takes to be that way, along with the obsessions and compulsions, is very, very impactful for them. Criterion C, so it is not better explained by something else. And D, that it is not a substance or medical related concern.
And there are a few specifiers in there as
well.
well.
That's right, yes.
Yeah.
So there's specifiers for Good insight, poor insight, delusions, and tick related. Is that all of them?
Yep. All right, so what are obsessions? And what I didn't say at the start is that Chloe and I are both ADHDs, but we're also both OCDs. So all of this is coming from research in the literature, our experience as practitioners, and also our lived experience, which is really important to acknowledge the lived experience part of it. So there are infinite types of OCD. I know, because we're human, we like to cluster them into boxes, and we can clump them into a few sections. Of course, there's a miscellaneous one as well, which covers actually so many things. But generally, OCD likes to grab onto the things we care about most, which is really rude and sneaky of it. So, for example, if you're religious, OCD will haunt the way you feel about praying and morality. If you're into maths or colours or organising, if you love your dogs like I do, OCD will hang around those themes. So it really likes to jump on our values and the things that we really care about, which is just so mean. And yes, Chloe came up with this idea of playing whack-a-mole with OCD. We often do, where we aim to reduce one set of intrusions or compulsions and they just pop up somewhere else. So it's actually really hard to work with. Like, it is fair that there's a myth out there about it being untreatable, because it's hard. It is really hard. I want to really validate that. If you've been on a journey of OCD yourself or someone you love, like, it is really tricky. Studies have shown that almost everybody experiences intrusive thoughts. So almost everyone on the planet experiences what we would call intrusive thoughts, and that are similar to OCD obsessions. But one model says that a key feature in the development of OCD is not the having of intrusive thoughts, because everybody does, but rather it's giving meaning to those thoughts as being significant and meaningful. So you have an intrusive thought and something in your system goes, oh, that means it's going to happen, or that feels really real, or that's really significant. So where we aim to reduce one set of due to holding some set of unhelpful beliefs. So due to kind of who you are as a person and the beliefs that you hold makes them meaningful and significant. So generally, the different types of intrusions include, up here top left, we've got aggressive obsessions, fear of harming self or others. And note that it's not intention to harm, but it's a fear of harm. Very, very, very different. These would be some of the safest people I would want to be around, because they're actually so worried about harming. And violent or horrific images, or blurting out obscenities or insults, or a whole list of other things. So if you feel like that might be you, look up aggressive intrusions or obsessions, and you can see whether that big list of things kind of meets up with something that you experience. Contamination obsessions, this is the one that gets a bad rap and is very kind of famous and stigmatized in the world. And that's concerns or disgust with bodily waste, dirt or germs, environmental contaminants, and sticky substances. And note that that's different to an autistic sensory issue around the feeling of sticky things or that sort of thing. There's sexual obsessions. So it includes sexual thoughts, images, or impulses that feel really perverse. And it can include thoughts about children. And there's so much stigma out there about this one. Sorry, I'm just going to admit somebody else. There is so much stigma about sexual obsessions, and really OCDs who experience sexual obsessions are probably the safest people to be around children, because they are so aware of doing the right thing. And it doesn't indicate any kind of want to act on the intrusions. It is just something that pops in their head and they can't control it. So it comes with a lot of shame, and it definitely will lead to a lot of avoidance, that one. So then there's hoarding and saving obsessions, religious obsessions, so excess concern with right and wrong and morality. You don't have to be religious to experience religious obsessions. It can be all about doing the right thing. Obsessions with the need for symmetry or exactness, with or without magical thinking. So magical thinking is, for example, like being concerned your mum might have an accident unless you do the right thing, or have all the things in place, or send her a message before she drives, or something like that. So this kind of thinking that because you've thought it, it's going to make it happen. Then there's miscellaneous obsessions. This one that I said has a really long list. Fear of not saying just the right thing, saying certain things, need to know or remember, intrusive words or thoughts, and that's different to autistic echolalia, which is very regulating. I think for the need to know, for the need to say something or sing something, that's very much coming from an urge that then the itch doesn't get scratched by doing it. It might for a second, but it's actually just perpetuating the cycle. Lucky and unlucky numbers, colors with special significance, superstitious fears, etc. And then there's somatic obsessions. So, for example, concern with illness or disease, or excessive concern with body parts or aspects of appearance. So, and when we say obsessions, we basically mean like really nasty, intrusive thoughts. And there's a whole lot of them.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so compulsions are how our brain tries to cope with the fear and distress of the obsessions. It's very much a protective response, even though it doesn't feel that way, and it does actually cause us more distress. So it's important to recognize that it is you trying to cope. It's just not particularly helpful coping that way. So there is cleaning and washing compulsions. So this is very much the stereotypical, most known compulsion for OCD. So it can look like excessive hand washing. It can look like needing to wash your hands after touching a particular surface. It can be ritualistic ways to wash your hands or to do hygiene tasks, or ways that you need to clean the house. And the point again is that it's excessive and it does actually cause distress doing it. Then there is checking compulsions. So a very common one is the hair straightener. Thank you for putting a little image there because it reminds me of the
No worries. I just think that's a really common one.
It's a very, very common one. So like forgetting that if you've or doubting whether you've actually unplugged or turned off your hair straightener and needing to check multiple times. Sometimes even having to physically stare at it and go, I have turned off the hair straightener, and then walking out of the room and going, did I?
You still don't believe yourself.
Yeah. Yes. It can be needing to check the locks multiple times, checking that you've locked the car multiple times. It can also be mental checking. So reviewing and replaying situations in your mind to make sure that you didn't forget something or that you didn't do something wrong. It is very different to the rumination that we see in anxiety or, in autism, because it's not about that sort of reviewing and replaying and sort of looking for that negative social feedback. It's very much the checking of, did I do something that I'm afraid to do? So for example, one could be if you have an intrusion that you have hurt somebody or you've caused harm to somebody, the compulsion might be actually mentally reviewing a conversation with somebody or mentally reviewing that interaction to make sure you didn't, push them off the balcony or you didn't do something to cause them harm. Yeah.
So that would be counted as a mental compulsion.
Yes. Yep. Yeah, exactly. And that's also, I find that's a really hard one because it crosses over so much with that anxiety too, and rumination. It sometimes is really hard to pull it apart.
Yeah.
Yeah. Repeating compulsions. So that could be needing to repeat a phrase or a word over and over, not because it is self-soothing, because you feel like you need to do that, or this bad thing's going to happen. So it's something to neutralize a thought or stop something from happening. It could be needing to repeat routine tasks, so needing to walk through a door, back and through the door multiple times. Counting compulsions, so needing to count tiles, for example, or needing to count number plates. And again, it's not a self-soothing, enjoyable tasks. It's this compulsion, this urge that you need to do the thing. Ordering and arranging, so needing things to be a particular way, needing it to be in a particular order. This again is different to if somebody prefers, say their bookshelves a certain way. So for example, I have my bookshelves color-coded and I really like organizing and I really like arranging, but that is self-soothing to me. I find it very comforting to do it. The difference with OCD is needing to do it. Otherwise, there's this fear, there's this distress if something is out of place or it's not right.
And I do hear some people talk about how when they're ordering or cleaning or whatever, in the moment, it's very soothing, but it doesn't last long.
Yes. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Miscellaneous, which I'm very glad you said that word before, because I was trying to say it and I couldn't figure out how to say it because I always say it wrong. So miscellaneous. So that sort of is compiled of a lot of different things. One example is superstitions. So those superstitions where, you know, if you say something and you don't want it to happen and you go, okay, touch wood. And it's different to, you know, if you just say it sort of flippantly and you might be around wood and you might be like, oh yeah, I'm going to touch wood. This is like this urge of, if I don't touch wood right now, something's going to happen, and you can't stop thinking about doing that thing until you actually get to do it.
The other thing I hear when you say something's going to happen, for some people, it's just that I will have so much distress, I won't be able to cope with it.
Yeah. Okay, hoarding and collecting. So that is this needing to keep all of these things in case, you know, there's this fear of, if I throw something out, I might need it in the future. Or if I throw this container out, this container might contaminate somebody and make them sick. So people may actually just keep all of these things. And it's different to trinket collecting. You know, it's different to, you know, wanting to collect buttons because you like buttons.
Which is a lovely autistic thing.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So it's, you know, absolutely trinket, collect and do those things. This is more like when it's quite unreasonable. So it might be like gum. It's like, I'm not getting rid of this gum, or I'm not getting rid of this container that has 5 holes and is orange and I'll never use it. It is, not being able to get rid of anything out of fear of, you know, what will happen if I do, or what if I need it in the future, or this really deep discomfort of getting rid of that thing. Yeah.
And is it usually attached to an intrusion?
Yeah, typically. Yeah.
All right, OCD and autism. This, when we put out into the community for questions, this was the biggest thing that came back. People were like, but how do you kind of dissect them? Because there are so many similarities, or on the surface, there's similarities. I definitely want to do a little 2-minute deep dive on dissecting this for you. So I would encourage you, as of tomorrow, the recording is going to be up on our website. So if you're really interested in the difference in these things, go back through to this moment, pause, zoom in on those Venn diagrams. I'm just going to be talking about the crossover bit in the middle for a moment. So they are both, autism and OCD are both routine and ritualized behaviors, what a lot of people refer to as rigidity, repetitive behaviors, sensory aversions, rule-focused, time-consuming, and monotropic mind. Which means like doing big deep dives. And maybe like when we start to look at the reason behind, you would say, well, the deep dive for an autistic brain is because they just love to immerse themselves in the topic. But a deep dive for an OCD brain might be research out of fear for not knowing, or thinking about something because they have to come up with lots and lots of solutions to neutralize the fear. So it's got that fear element behind it. So the difference between OCD and autistic repetition is the underlying function. So many things that may look the same on the surface, that's great. It doesn't mean it's both or the same. It's what driving it that counts. And autistic minds can be quite obsessive in nature. And I say that with really like neutral intent, not saying that it's a bad thing at all. When thinking about special interests and that sort of thing, but however, the difference is the function and purpose that the behaviors serve. So, for example, spins, stimming, sensory seeking and avoiding, and need for rules and routine, they're very autistic traits, but they're not completed out of fear, but to regulate. So all of these autistic things are to regulate, and they do serve a regulating function. Compulsions only temporarily soothe. So that's a really important differential there. And the function of autistic repetitive thoughts and behaviors is to soothe, whereas OCD obsessions are unwanted and fear-based, and compulsions are an attempt to get rid of the obsession or prevent a feared outcome. So it's very much about getting rid of the scary thing that you feel like is going to happen, or to make yourself feel better because you think you're not going to cope and there's going to be too much distress. So compulsions are not regulating in nature. Yes, temporarily, but not long term, not even really medium term. But they often continue to drive the obsession and the fear. So really, if we're engaging in compulsions, it does actually make everything worse long term. It kind of drives the whole thing. Research supports that using typical OCD approaches with OCDs who are also autistic will actually not be effective, and vice versa. So that's why it's really important to work out, is it OCD? Is it autism? Is it both? Are we creating a plan here that attacks both? And on autistic anxiety and OCD reassurance seeking, if preparation, we were talking about this today, if preparation for something is really, really soothing and regulating and not just fleetingly, so such as like looking up the menu for a restaurant before you go because the unknown is killing you. If it's really, really regulating to do the preparation, it's more likely an autistic worry or an anxious worry than OCD. Whereas seeking reassurance in OCD really only provides temporary relief and actually reinforces it. So really getting this theme coming through. I just wanted to very quickly touch on the occurrence, the rate of co-occurrence. So the lifetime prevalence of OCD in kind of the broad general population is about 1.6-ish percent. And that's Kessler et al. If you're interested in the research, we have a slide at the end with all the studies on it. Co-occurring OCD has been found in 9 to 22% of autistic individuals.
Lot, actually.
Yeah, compared to 1.6 in the general population, 9 to 22%. So on average, a fifth of autistic people are also OCDs. Individuals first diagnosed with autism have a twofold higher chance of later diagnosis of OCD. And individuals diagnosed with OCD in this research study displayed nearly a fourfold higher chance to be diagnosed as autistic later in life. So they really do flock together, is the point. And the last little thing about autism and OCD is just on sensory aversions. So sensory aversions are based on sensory processing, not fear. Anything related to OCD, you'll usually find that root is something to do with fear. But in autism, it's just when it's sensory things, sensory aversions are just a sensory processing difference. So it's not about fear. Something might feel absolutely disgusting and icky, but it's not a fear.
So OCD and ADHD also have quite a high crossover. Often ADHD behaviors can look like OCD and vice versa. So both OCDs and ADHDs will experience sleep disruption, but for different reasons. So for OCDs, it can be sort of those recurrent sort of intrusions or thoughts that are playing in their mind that might keep them awake, or they're engaging in compulsions that keep them awake. Whereas for ADHD is often is that busy mind, that racing mind, not wanting to go to sleep, enjoying the thing they're doing. So it's very different reasons for that sleep disruption, or even, hyper focusing on an interest and staying up late as well. So it can be good reasons.
Do that? What do you
Never,
think about?
No. It can be good reasons, but still sleep disruption. Emotion regulation difficulties for both OCDs and ADHDs. There is also impacts on working memory. So for ADHDs, we know executive functioning challenges is a core component of being an ADHDer. But for OCDs, it takes a lot of executive functioning energy to actually focus on an obsession, to focus on an intrusion, to ruminate, to engage in compulsions, that there's no capacity for executive functioning. So then it can look like they have difficulty focusing, or they become distracted, or they're not present. And that looks like ADHD, but it's not. There's a different function, there's a different reason driving the behavior. Both ADHDs and OCDs can engage in skin picking and hair pulling, but for ADHDs, it's often understimulation. So I often find kids with ADHD will pick at their arms if they're really bored in class and they don't have fidgets, or they pull their hair because they're understimulated. But for OCDs, it's a compulsive act. They need to pull, they need to skin pick. Another big one for ADHD is the checking behavior. So this can often look like a compulsive act. So as an example, ADHDers may check an email multiple times to make sure that they didn't make a mistake on that email, to make sure that they didn't send the wrong thing, to make sure they didn't forget anything. And so they'll repeatedly check. This is coming from a very realistic experience of challenges with executive functioning. It is an overcompensatory response as opposed to OCD compulsive checking. So it's important to recognize the difference, to recognize where it's actually coming from. And again, because ADHD does cross over with OCD, checking if that person actually does have, like, do they meet the criteria for OCD in other areas, not just, some of those sort of singular, overcompensatory strategy sort of areas. Yeah.
But it's again about the function underneath, the why, the big why of why it's happening, which takes a lot of good formulation.
It does.
By a clinician or a practitioner, and really thinking through. Yeah, it's very important.
Yeah. And it can take a long time. Like, admittedly, it's, for me, sometimes I will work with a person for like a year, and then we'll be like, oh, what's this?
Yes.
We need to look at this.
Yes.
So yeah, sometimes it does take time. So OCD crosses over with many other things. I won't go through all of them. But again, it's important to recognize that while OCD does, occur on its own singularly, more often than not, there's often other things in the picture as well. So it means we shouldn't completely rule out OCD, but we also shouldn't rule out other things, and recognizing which, what plays what part in all of it, so you know how to approach it. Okay, let's get into our interventions. Okay, so CBT. So CBT is essentially the umbrella term for various cognitive and behavioral therapies. It very simply, it consists of reframing unhelpful thought patterns and changing behavior patterns that are impacting on well-being. There are some strengths with CBT. So it can be effective when it's used in conjunction with other therapies. It is a very structured approach, which can suit some people
and really not suit others.
Exactly. Yeah. Yep. So some strengths can also be weaknesses. I'll also say that now. There's like a either or. It addresses the distorted beliefs that actually drive the obsessions too, which I guess is an important part, is sort of recognizing the underlying sort of fear there. The limitations, though, is that research has shown that CBT on its own is not particularly effective with treating OCD. Even when they pair it with exposure response prevention therapy, which we'll get to in a minute, the effect doesn't change. So it's not particularly helpful, I suppose, with OCD. It can also be very homework heavy. And if you're an ADHDer, that you may never do your homework. And so that's not very helpful.
Not our favorite thing.
Yeah. It doesn't account for different cognitive processing styles. It can also feel very invalidating if you're sort of told to think about something a different way, or sort of making you feel like your experience isn't valid. And it can also reinforce reassurance seeking, which is a compulsion as part of OCD as well. Okay, so this is the takeaway for CBT. So you can start with challenging the thought with evidence. So has this fear actually ever happened before? What is the actual evidence for or against this thought? What would I tell a friend with this thought? And what is the probability that my feared outcome will actually come true? And then create a more balanced thought. So, for example, that may look like, I have checked the stove. The risk of the house burning down is low. My OCD is trying to keep me safe, but it is over-exaggerating and the danger is not helpful. One caveat I will say with this is, if the compulsion is mental checking and reassurance seeking, this is probably not the best strategy to use, because it just will sort of keep that spiral going. But it could be useful for somebody else. So it's, yeah.
Also, what stands out to me going through all of this is it's all very cognitive, and you have to be in the right space for that. If you are really like physically distressed, if you're feeling a lot of distress in your body, this isn't going to touch that.
No, that's right. And I also think be prepared that, especially the one where has this ever happened before, I've had people be like, yep.
Yeah.
And then I'm lost for words. And I'm like, okay, well, where do I go from here? Yeah. So yeah, sometimes this is helpful. But there's other options which we'll also go through.
All right, next one.
Okay. So exposure and response prevention.
This is the big one.
Therapy. Yes. So this is a CBT approach. It is the most common approach for treating OCD. It is, so the exposure aspect of it is gradually exposing somebody to the anxiety-provoking situation, and then trying to get them to not engage in the compulsions. And the response prevention part of that is trying to consistently get them to move up a like fear hierarchy. So they'll start with a fear that might be a lower level fear, and then it will move higher up to, their biggest fear. And throughout that process, it's exposure to that fear, and then don't engage in the thing that soothes you, that compulsion. It can be very intensive.
Yeah, it doesn't sound nice.
Yeah, I got a little bit anxious actually talking about it. So the strengths of ERP is that it directly targets compulsions, which is helpful. But again, we need more than just targeting the compulsions. Otherwise, we're playing whack-a-mole. It also is considered the gold standard treatment. So there is a lot of research on ERP and it being the most commonly used. However,
I was waiting for the however.
Yeah, however, this is the exciting bit. It's negative, but it's exciting for me. So there was a systematic review done that actually found that 78% of studies had a researcher allegiance bias, which essentially means that those researchers already had a preference for ERP going into the researcher's study. And within that, it also meant that ERP studies had a higher likelihood of actually getting published in the first place. They also found that only 20% of those studies made sure that the participants weren't engaging in any sort of medication use for OCD. So that means the majority of the studies, they were actually engaging in ERP and also taking medication.
So you can't work out what's what.
Yes, exactly. And for the percentage that didn't have the researcher allegiance bias, the effect for ERP was actually non-significant. So that's very interesting.
Oh, that is interesting.
Yes. And my limitations continue. So it is not inherently neuroaffirming. It can be quite harmful if you don't take into consideration the sensory needs of the person, the sensory processing differences. Many autistic and ADHDers also already have quite a reduced window of tolerance because of all the other things that we're trying to cope with daily. So then to add exposure therapy on top of that, it is essentially this emotional flooding of the nervous system. And then symptoms will often be worse, but then also reduced functioning and a lot more, it's harder to regulate in the long run. It ends up not being helpful at all. It doesn't account for different cognitive processing styles. It can also encourage masking through forced tolerance of a stimulus. So just learning to pretend to be able to cope with that stimulus. It has a lot of high dropout rates. So often people don't actually finish ERP, which I'm not surprised. And I think the initial sort of like main study where ERP sort of grew from, they actually excluded autistic and ADHDers, right? Yeah, so we don't even know how effective it is. Yeah, for autistic and ADHD.
Wonderful.
Yes. And again, it can be invalidating and it can be quite re-traumatizing if it's not neuroaffirming.
Yeah. So can CBT and ERP be neuroaffirming? The answer is it's nuanced. I'm sure they can be with great care. They can be adapted to be neuroaffirming, but you need consent, safety, curiosity, and an effort to deeply understand the individual's neurotype and nervous system, identity, and history is required to provide true neuroaffirming care. So other modalities may need to be substituted or used alongside if you deem it's appropriate at all for that person. When aspects of CBT and ERP fall short or it's not appropriate for the person.
Yeah, and I remember us talking about this when we were preparing, going back and forth about whether ERP was neuroaffirming, and I couldn't land on anything, which bothers my brain because I want it to be black or white.
Yeah.
But I think it is really dependent on the person, and I think that's why it's really important to have this collaborative approach and actually understand those strengths and weaknesses so the person can decide for themselves. But also, I guess, reconceptualizing what exposure can look like. Like I remember using the example of there's a lot of shame associated with having intrusive thoughts, especially if it's, harm-based. And sometimes the exposure can actually be being in a therapeutic space and saying that that's, the intrusion you're experience and being met with non-judgment. And that's not the typical exposure, but it is sort of this re-experiencing. So I think it's also sort of reconceptualizing what it can actually look like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
With great care, I think is the answer.
Yeah.
Beautiful. All right.
Oh, this is all me. Yes. Okay. So acceptance and commitment therapy sees inner experiences such as obsessions, intrusive thoughts, and anxiety as part of our human experience and focuses on finding a way to allow obsessions and anxiety to come and go without interfering with the way one lives. So there's many strengths with acceptance and commitment therapy. I really like it. It is value focused. So it addresses the core part of unwanted intrusive thoughts. So actually, as I was just saying before, that intrusive thoughts often attack your values. And so there is a lot of shame associated. So part of ACT is actually focusing on your values so you can live a value-driven life and actually helping you to recognize that just because you have these intrusions does not mean that they're aligned with your values. They're not representative of your values. It's also non-judgmental and quite compassionate of an approach, which I think is very much needed to reduce those feelings of shame that come along with having OCD. For so many reasons, I think it's very hard being an OCDer, and from the outside, people will say, well, just stop doing that thing or don't worry about that thing. And it's not that easy, but then it can feel very shameful because you can't stop. And so we tend to hide it. So ACT is very much a compassionate based approach. It also supports sustainable coping, and it's widely usable with other co-occurring things that go along with OCD. So that's also part of it. It's very practical. You can use it for so many different things. So it's great in that sense. There are some limitations. So ACT isn't as well researched. There is some research that it can be effective when used alongside medication in particular, but there just really isn't much study done with ACT and OCD, unfortunately. It can also be quite abstract. So ACT uses a lot of metaphors. So depending on the person, depends on if this is a strength or a weakness, and it might just be adapting the approach. So sometimes I've used metaphors with people and they look at me like I have three heads and the metaphor doesn't make sense. And so then sometimes I have to go into something a little bit more tangible. But that can also be a good thing about ACT is it can be quite flexible in that sense that you can actually adapt a lot of the approaches to suit the individual. But also limitation can be that it is less structured. It doesn't really have a linear approach. It is literally sort of like a hexagon. You kind of bounce around from one point to the other point. and depending on the person, depends on, if that's something they actually like. So some takeaways for ACT. There's something called cognitive diffusion, which is about trying to diffuse from your thoughts, try and separate from your thoughts, trying to recognize that you're not your thoughts. There's a lot of fun ways to do this. So you can sing the thought to a song. I don't do this in public, but I'll do it at home.
I do it everywhere.
Yeah. It could be you imagine your thoughts as passengers on a bus. You are driving the bus, you're in control of the bus, and you can either focus on you when you're driving, or you can focus on the passenger saying all these things in the back of the bus. And you can just say, I'm not interested in listening to this passenger. They're very obnoxious.
They are.
Yes.
I love the one where you just say, oh, I notice I'm having the thought about blah, blah, blah. Oh, I notice that intrusion is back again. Yep, there it is.
I say that so much at home. My partner goes, that's cool. It's cool. Just, okay, great.
Yep. I'm saying hello to the OCD. You're trying to keep me safe, but I'm okay. Just really acknowledging it. And then also, I love for anybody that gets images, playing with the image in your head, make it black and white, make it sepia, make it rainbow, make it fast motion, reversing, add another character to make it funny or less serious. It's kind of like the I'm doing this Harry Potter Bogart scene where it comes out and they do their little spell and then they make it funny. So particularly if it's quite distressing, I guess the issue is doing this all the time if you're getting a lot of intrusions is really tiring.
Yeah, so sort of recognizing too, I think I remember you saying to me, like recognizing too when it's a cognitive diffusion and when you're sort of using it as like dissociation as well.
Yeah. All right, we're going to burn through the next couple because of time. So inference-based CBT has actually been found to be as effective as CBT at the moment, and research is still emerging. So definitely lots of promise in this one, and it really works for a lot of people. It changes your relationship to doubt. So where we have beliefs and things that make us doubt ourselves, it actually changes your relationship to the doubt, and it strengthens reality-based reasoning instead of fear-based reasoning. So I guess the strengths are it's very neuroaffirming. It talks about strong imagination and creativity. It's really empowering and validating. It reduces reassurance and checking. It targets the root of the ACDC of the OCD doubt, and it encourages curiosity and awareness and builds cognitive flexibility. The limitations are that not as many people are trained in it, so it's not as common. But if there's any clinicians out there, I would actually encourage you to find some training on this because it's pretty fabulous. Smaller evidence base than ERP, but it is emerging. And it's not a quick fix. It requires quite a bit of dedication to learn and practice how to do this practice. And it's also quite abstract. And then we've got a little takeaway for this, which I won't completely go through, but basically it's catching the story starting, like when you're about to do the thing or you notice it coming in, asking yourself, what am I seeing versus what am I imagining? So I can see the locked door, that's real. The idea that it might somehow unlock itself is imagination. So really working with your imagination and going, what's real versus imagined here? Grounding yourself in reality and giving yourself an optional neuroaffirming reframe of something like, my brain is amazing at imagining things, at imagining possibilities, and it's just sometimes really overprotective. So through all of that, it changes your relationship with doubt. All right, the next one is metacognitive therapy, which I will take you through nice and quickly. So it really addresses thinking about thinking. So metacognitive, kind of like above the brain, thinking about the brain. Thinking about thinking, it reduces mental checking, so it's really good for that. And it's a novel approach for intrusive thought, so it's quite different. Challenges are it's newer with limited large trials, and it's not widely available, so very similar to our inference-based CBT. And it's best for people stuck in mental compulsions or rumination, which is quite unique. And it's also good for those who are open to an innovative approach. And then a takeaway for this modality is to notice the trigger thought and say something like, this is a thought, not a danger signal. Label it as a process, not a truth. So here we're really working with thinking about the thinking. So it's a process, not a truth. And we're describing how you're thinking, not what you're thinking. So it's like the process and the quality of the thoughts. How am I thinking right now? Not what am I thinking? My mind is doing that what if thing again. So that's a bit similar to ACT. This is just my brain scanning for danger. Shifting your attention, noticing the things around you, grounding yourself in the reality. Once the moment has passed, reflecting back. So this is a bit of a novel thing in this modality, reflecting back and saying, did I stay in observer mode? Or did the thought fade when I didn't engage in it? So really noticing what was going on for you in that moment. So lots of thinking about thinking, and you're training your brain to disengage from rumination and build cognitive flexibility. So then the next one, mindfulness-based CBT, is a lovely, lovely therapy. And research really shows that where there's co-occurring OCD and other things, the standard treatment of SSRI, so that medication, and CBT or ERP often aren't enough. So we need to acknowledge that when it's complex in the brain, it needs to be complex in the formulation and quite detailed in the approach. So that standard approach of SSRIs and ERP just doesn't cut it. This is where something like mindfulness-based therapy could be really helpful. And the research, there is small but growing research with some lovely case studies and that sort of thing around how it really helped people to live an adaptive life, and they were able to go about their life living it meaningfully and in a rich way. The obsessive thoughts didn't completely disappear. They often don't, but they could still live that full and healthy life. So it was really helpful for them. It reduces rumination, develops mindfulness skills, which is always a good thing, and helps with intrusive thoughts. Challenges are it's less evidence. It's usually adjunctive, so we add it on to something else, and it requires quite a bit of practice commitment, as any new skill does. Best for people prone to rumination and those wanting mindfulness integrated into their treatment. And a little takeaway is just notice, name, and nurture. So I'm just going to quickly take you through, as non-psychiatrists, non-GPs, but people who have researched this a lot and hear lots of stories from our clients. The first thing that a doctor will try is an SSRI, unless there's some kind of issue with that type of medication for a person. And so that's really good for kind of mild, anywhere from mild to severe, and they pair it with therapy. Then they might try something like a tricyclic antidepressant or a mood stabilizer, something like lamotrigine, or a low-dose antipsychotic. So that's more for when we're just not cutting it with the SSRIs and with the treatment that we're trying. And the really, really brilliant thing about medication, this is, I really want to speak to people here who are hesitant to try medication for OCD or hesitant to move beyond the SSRIs. And that's that it helps quiet the brain's alarm system, lowers the intensity of the distress, improves access to the prefrontal cortex here in the front of your brain, access to the wise mind, so you can actually put therapy things in place, helps with tolerance of uncertainty. It really supports nervous system regulation, and it doesn't change who you are. It just makes the work you do more effective, which that sounds nice to me. So
it's essentially another tool in your toolbox, isn't it?
Yep, just another tool. Let's get rid of the stigma around medication. All right, a little bit about a few other things that we thought of. We put our heads together and said, what else do we do here? This list could have been longer. Yeah,
it could have been. I'm sort of realizing as we're going through this that it seems like the treatment for OCD is very sort of multifaceted, isn't it? It's not really sort of one intervention and you roll with that. It is actually almost like a cocktail where you're sort of grabbing parts of different things. See what works.
And I read a study today actually in prep for this that said when therapy is in parts, it's just as effective as like deep diving and doing one thing really, really well. Like what it was trying to say is it can be really, really effective to do it in parts for OCD. Yeah. So parts work is when we view a person in terms of all the different parts of themselves, and we work with the part of them that gets those urges or gets those images, or the OCD part. It's a really beautiful therapy. There's not a lot of research on its connection to OCD, but I know anecdotally that a lot of people really resonate with it.
So schema therapy, I love schema therapy. So schemas are the beliefs about ourselves and the way that we view the world. They're often developed quite early. Oh, keep feeding my mic, so sorry. They're often developed quite early in childhood, but they can adapt and change, through our life experiences. But schema therapy, there's some research on its effectiveness with OCD. There's not very much quality research. Schema therapy itself, I would say, is still quite new in the research, let alone sort of linking it with OCD. But they have found links between early maladaptive schemas and the manifestation of obsessions within OCD. So it can be a really good add-on to sort of explore those deep underlying sort of roots that are actually driving that OCD.
And sometimes people are born with an OCD brain, very much like the basal ganglia just does its thing in the brain, and the pathways that press like the accelerator for these urges and impulses and thoughts is just go, go, go. And the pathway that presses the stop button, so that the brake just is underdeveloped. So overdeveloped go and underdeveloped stop. And the research says that all these kinds of treatments that we're really talking about today and trying to work on can change the brain patterning, which is awesome. But I really want to highlight with this slide that when trauma has been a big part of developing OCD, you need to go to the root cause. So that's why a really good formulation is really important. Yep. EMDR can be really helpful, which is originally a trauma therapy, and now it can be used for any kind of unhelpful belief. And EMDR is really great because the comparable completion rates and clinical outcomes are equivalent to CBT, and even heading towards ERP, which is really great for the people that chose to do that therapy. And so 60% finished the trial, and half of those had clinically significant improvement, which is about what we get with OCD. It's really hard to work with, but I find that EMDR is a lovely way to work on the root stuff. And then creative approaches. This is kind of our last point for today. Creative approaches can be so beautiful, holistic, healing. They meet you where you're at. They're fun. They're engaging. Things like getting a kid or adult, to draw or paint their OCD figure, or the part of their brain that holds the OCD. Come up with a character or a storyline, using play therapy to teach other ways to regulate than the compulsions.
Yeah, absolutely. And helping to or learning to regulate through play. And I think that's both for children and adults. Yeah. And it can just be so fun. I think to be able to make a topic that, is quite distressful for a lot of people, and make it sort of fun in the way that you try and sort of process and, sort of intervene with that. I think, it's a very lighthearted way to sort of, go for that. Yeah.
So I think the moral of the story is it takes a village of modalities, really. It takes a big approach. It takes a great formulation, which means understanding the story of why. The why is really important when thinking about co-occurring stuff. Is it this or is it that? Well, why? What's going on? And coming to a place where you accept that this is part of your brain type can be really freeing. It sometimes comes with incredible distress, but you can work with it. And so get a team around you and work on it. I'm going to quickly take you through a few resources now, and then we'll let you go and have your evening. So the Psych Hive here, we have our All About series, all about ADHD, autism, and that's more for families who have had an identification. All About ADHD for adults who are ADHD themselves. And very recently, only this week, we released the All About PDA book, which is just fabulous. You can catch all of those on our website. And Chloe and I are currently writing the All About OCD workbook or booklet, and it's going to come out in December this year. So keep your eye out for that.
Okay, so some extra resources. So The Joy Thief by Penny Moody is really, really good. She talks about her lived experience with OCD. Try Not to Think About a Pink Elephant is a compilation of stories about OCD. There's nothing specific in there about, how to, cope with obsessions or compulsions, but I find that it can be very validating hearing other people's experiences and just having understanding of different ways that OCD can actually present and that experience for other People. Divergent Conversations podcast. So that one is hosted by Dr. Megan Neff and Patrick Casale. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but they have a series on OCD, and it's quite long actually, and it's really, really interesting. And they have some experts on to talk, but they also do a lot of other podcast episodes on other co-occurring things within OCD. So it's very, very good listen. Then we have Breaking the Rules, which is a podcast episode, podcast series. It is sort of aimed at clinicians, but I would say that, you know, anybody can listen to it. It's applicable to anyone. And it's really, really good because it actually goes through all these different parts and components of OCD that we possibly couldn't cover in an hour. And it's just so fascinating.
Are there any questions? We would love for you to pop them in the chat. We'll just open up the chat so we can see it. I'm aware that we've gone a little bit over time, but we'd love to be able to answer questions for you. So I'll give you a minute just to put those in. If you've got anything you would like to know about tonight's topic, we would love to answer that for you. So we'll just give you a minute to pop them in. Okay, so here's our first one. Sometimes compulsions are done to stop a fear, but autistic traits or repetitive behaviours can also be ways to manage a fear of losing control or to regain control. Since the actions can look very similar, how can we tell the difference between them? Is it important to know the difference, or would the support strategies be the same? What a great question.
This is a fabulous question. I guess I always come back to the reason why. So I guess, yeah, it is very similar. Like obviously there's a fear there that's driving this compulsion. But I guess for this, it's sort of losing control, try to regain control. It's not really, would you say it's driven by an intrusion?
No.
Yeah.
And I would also say that the support around it, so seeking that reassurance, is very satiating. So it actually kind of soothes. And like my example of looking up the menu, there might be fear there around what's going to be at the restaurant, but looking up the menu kind of satiates that.
Yeah.
Whereas in an OCD way, that itch can't really be scratched.
And I guess it depends what the control looks like.
Yeah.
So that sense of, needing to know maybe when you go somewhere what the parking situation is like, that you have a booking, what the restaurant looks like, what there is on the menu, all of those things then are quite soothing and help ease that anxiety, and provide a sense of certainty. But I guess then with those OCD compulsions, there's that short-term relief, but it actually doesn't help in the long run. So I think it's also noticing if the way you respond to it, is it helpful or unhelpful? And that's also distinguishing the difference. Yeah.
And I think something about the quality of the fear as well. For an autistic person, fear, there is a lot of anxiety because we're in a world that is not made for our brains. And so there's a lot of fear of, are they going to accommodate? Are they going to understand me? Am I going to say a stupid thing? Perceived stupid, all that kind of stuff. But the quality feels very different to an OCD fear.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
A good one to unpack. Yeah, really great. We've got another one. Would intrusive thoughts include catastrophizing about things? What a great question. I think catastrophizing, so many people can relate to catastrophizing. So I would say like an easy answer is a lot of people catastrophize. And then you'd have OCD catastrophizing that looks probably more intense, very different.
Yeah, and it's a little bit more unrealistic, right? So like when I typically think of catastrophizing, if we're thinking sort of in generalized anxiety, it is often based in reality. So for example, if someone has like a fear of presenting, for example, and they catastrophize and they go, I'm going to stumble over my words, I'm going to mess up, they start catastrophizing in that sense. It's still grounded in reality. Whereas with that OCD intrusion of catastrophizing, it would be, what if I stab somebody with this knife right now? Like it's a lot more intense. There's a lot more intensity to it. And it isn't as based in reality. Yeah.
What about, we've got a really good one here. What about the difference between anxiety or OCD in terms of intrusive thoughts? What do you reckon about that?
Probably similar to sort of what I was saying, where with anxiety, there is often still that reality attached to it. It is usually based on like events, sort of like daily events or things you might be worried about. I wouldn't say they're like as sticky as OCD. I guess that's sort of how I think about it.
There's a real stickiness to OCD intrusions, and they just feel really like I just can't flick it off. And so people try the mental compulsion of sort of trying to shut it down, but it's very tricky.
Yeah. And so, yeah, those intrusive thoughts, I think, with anxiety are more sort of like those worries, that sort of like rumination, the worries about something. But with, OCD, it's this, sticky thought.
Perfectionism and general anxiety. I guess if we think about perfectionism and the why, I guess it would be coming probably from a place of not feeling good unless things are perfect. And it's about self-worth. It's not coming from a place of an intrusive thought or an obsessive thought. So if we think about the why behind those things, they're very different. So where it could look very similar, but you need to understand the why, is getting things just right, just so. There is a thing called just right OCD. It's very common in autistic people. But it's different to perfectionism, where it's more like it's related to my self-worth to get this right. Thank you. See you later. How do we encourage someone to get help when they don't want to see a psychologist? They feel their behavior doesn't interfere with their everyday functioning. They're also grieving for a lost partner and their compulsions are getting more intense. Okay, so we've got a potential traumatized person or something that is going on. They're showing OCD characteristics. I think the answer is pretty generalizable for any time anyone doesn't want to see a psychologist. And that's just offer them love and support in any way you can. Talk to them about it, about the need, and they have to be ready, because if you forced them to turn up, they wouldn't share openly. The therapeutic relationship alliance wouldn't be able to be built properly. You really can't force it, but you can just kind of love and be there.
Yeah, I think definitely like meeting somebody where they're at, because sometimes like on the outside you can see that they really need help, but they might not actually be ready for that help yet. Yeah. So if they go see a psychologist when they're not ready, it often doesn't end up actually being a good experience for them at all.
Yeah.
And so sometimes it's actually just about support, and that support might just be being there for them, even despite them not sort of seeking this external help.
Yeah, for sure. We might wrap it up there. Thanks, everyone. I'm just going to quickly show, for the sake of the video, the key references slide. So we loved doing our little deep dive. Someone says, thank you. You're so welcome. If you have any questions, feel free to email the Psych Hive. That's hello@thepsychhive.com. And we will put this video up on the website from tomorrow in the seminars section. And good luck with your journeys. We encourage you to use lots of affirming language. Anything you want to say?
Just thank you for listening to us. Yeah, this is very much an interest topic. So being able to like info dump for an hour has been fabulous.
It's very joyful.
Yes.
Yeah. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Good luck on your journeys, and we'll catch you at the next webinar. Okay.
Bye.
Bye.